Hello and welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Professor Soumya Uma. In the last module, we had an overview of the role of NGOs in protecting human rights. In this second module, we will discuss case studies of some international NGOs in order to understand their work and method of functioning. The learning outcomes of this particular module are, firstly, to understand the work of international NGOs called INGOs. Secondly, to familiarize ourselves with some prominent international NGOs and their strategies, approaches and activities on human rights issues. Thirdly, to comprehend the interface between international NGOs and the United Nations in protecting human rights. NGOs play an increasingly significant role in upholding human rights and in implementing human rights standards in the present context. An international NGO has similar vision, mission and mandate as national and state level NGOs. However, their sphere of work cuts across geographical borders as their work extends to many countries and to country specific human rights issues. The previous module has provided an overview of the work of human rights NGOs. In this particular module, we will study more closely the work of selected international NGOs and understand the interface between INGOs and the United Nations in protecting and promoting human rights. As discussed in the last module, some NGOs are operational, aimed at implementing various developmental projects and operations in each country, whereas others are advocacy based, focusing on law and policy making in various countries. Many NGOs have components or wings or departments of both approaches which they implement within the countries where they work. Now, let us discuss the work of Amnesty International, which is an INGO which you must have definitely heard of. Amnesty International was founded in 1961 by a British lawyer by the name of Peter Benenson. Mr. Benenson was shocked and angry when two Portuguese students were jailed for raising a toast to freedom. He expressed his thoughts and feelings through an article. The title of this article was "The Forgotten Prisoners," and this was in a newspaper called Observer. And thereafter, Mr. Benenson launched a campaign in support of the students. The article focused on worldwide practices of torture, illegal detention, extrajudicial killings, and imprisonment of individuals who expressed political viewpoints contrary to the government in power. In other words, the article illustrated how governments around the world were violating the standards set by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The article received a tremendous positive response all over the world, and it was reprinted in many newspapers across several countries. When this happened, he realized that people from different parts of the world could unite on issues pertaining to justice and freedom. This led to the birth of the Amnesty International, which was a movement for social change. In 1961, it was called Appeal for Amnesty, but by September 1962, it came to be called Amnesty International, which is its present name. What started as an appeal then came to be transformed into a global movement working to protect and promote human rights. In the initial decade, which is the 1960s, the focus area of Amnesty International was prisoners of conscience. It campaigned for releasing political prisoners, that is, prisoners who were imprisoned by their governments due to their political thoughts and activities which were in opposition to the government in power, provided such thoughts and opinions did not advocate violence. In the 1970s, its mandate expanded to include fair trial, opposing long detention without trial, and also custodial torture. It also focused on prisoners' rights, illegal detention, custodial torture, and thereafter on death penalty. In the 1980s, its work on refugees became very visible as it sought to make interventions on large-scale displacement due to war and famine, leading to the refugee crisis. In the 1990s, while retaining its focus on prisoners of conscience, fair trial and refugees, Amnesty International brought attention to human rights violations that were being committed on specific groups of people. Who were these groups of people? These included refugees, racial, ethnic or religious minorities, women, those executed and those prisoners who were on death row. Till the 2000s, its focus was largely on civil and political rights within the gamut of human rights. It came under considerable criticism for ignoring social, economic and cultural rights, which are also an essential part of human rights. After 2000, with the new challenges which came to be posed by globalization, Amnesty International expanded its mandate to include social, economic and cultural rights, and it started addressing issues such as corporate accountability, sexual and reproductive rights, decriminalization of sex work, armed conflict, arms control, rights of indigenous people and freedom of expression. If we look at the countries of Amnesty International's operation, in the 1960s, soon after its establishment, it started working in 3 regions of the world. These regions were communist regions, capitalist regions and developing regions. By mid-1960s, it set up an international secretariat and an international executive committee to manage the activities of country offices. Today, its presence can be felt in all regions of the world. It is a global movement consisting of more than 30 lakhs of supporters, members and activists across the world. While the basic mandate of the NGO is determined internationally, the country offices also take on issues that are specific to the countries where they are situated in. Amnesty International has an office in India which is situated in Bengaluru. Now let us discuss the strategies and activities of Amnesty International. Firstly, it investigates and researches on human rights violations and exposes them through its reports. The publication of impartial and accurate reports based on research that includes interviews with victims, concerned officials, human rights activists, media monitoring, as well as trial observations form the backbone of Amnesty International's work. Secondly, in addition to publishing reports, It also issues press releases, newsletters and information on websites. Thirdly, in those countries where Amnesty International does not have a country office, it sends official missions to make insistent inquiries on the status of human rights, provided the particular country permits the organizations to do so. Fourthly, it initiates what is called urgent action campaigns. This is on behalf of individuals who have faced a threat of human rights violations, such as those sentenced with death penalty or those detained without a trial. Fifthly, it persuades and pressurizes countries and corporations to respect their obligation under international human rights law. Sixthly, it initiates campaigns for the release of individuals, for the protection of rights of vulnerable communities, and for law reform through petitions, letters and protests. Seventhly, it supports people's effort at awareness raising and public education. Eighthly, it mobilizes supporters and defenders of human rights throughout the world to stand in defense of human rights activities at the front line. Now, let us look at some important work and significant achievements of Amnesty International. Amnesty International has been consistently researching and monitoring death penalty and executions in many countries every year. Its reports have been widely used by other INGOs as well as by national and state level NGOs in order to raise awareness and advocate for human rights. Its reports have brought out issues such as the number of children and juveniles who have been awarded death penalty or who have been executed across the world. One of its pioneering research on India was a study of Supreme Court judgments on death penalty from 1950 till 2006. Amnesty International was also active in promoting and recognizing universality of human rights. It has substantially contributed to the formulation and implementation of the UN Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners and for securing ratifications for the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights and the UN Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Amnesty International was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1977 for its campaign against torture and the UN Prize in the field of human rights in 1978. It has a consultative status with the United Nations, the Council of Europe, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and UNESCO, through which it is able to influence the formation and implementation of very important international human rights standards. In the field of INGOs, Amnesty International has the longest history and the most widespread recognition. In terms of its financing, Amnesty International receives fees and donations through its members across the world, which are more than 30 lakh in number. However, that alone may not fully meet the expenses incurred by this huge NGO with its activities. Its policy is not to accept donations from governments or governmental organizations, so that it may totally retain its full independence. It also steers clear of funds from political parties, religious bodies and corporations. As a logical corollary to its critical analysis of the state of human rights and policies and practices in many countries, many governments have criticized Amnesty International, particularly saying that it has a partisan or a biased approach and it has a disregard for security issues while focusing on human rights violations. Additionally, Amnesty International has also faced a criticism on a number of issues. It has been criticized, for example, for maintaining poor labor standards within the organization through excessive payment for management and a low level of protection for its overseas staff. Now, let us discuss another well-known international NGO, and this is called Human Rights Watch. I am sure you have heard about Human Rights Watch. It is as famous and as popular as Amnesty International. Human Rights Watch, also called HRW, is an international NGO that engages in research and advocacy on human rights issues in varied countries across the world. It was established in 1978 in the name of Helsinki Watch to monitor the implementation of Helsinki Accords of 1975, which called for cooperative and respectful relations between the communist bloc and the Western countries. America's Watch was established in 1981, which addressed the commission of war crimes and the violation of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, both by governments and rebel groups in Central America. Subsequently, Asia Watch was established in 1985, Africa Watch in 1988, Middle East Watch in 1989. Thereafter, all these watch committees were brought together under the umbrella of Human Rights Watch. Today, Human Rights Watch has its headquarters in New York and the country offices in many European and some African as well as Asian countries, notably in Nairobi in the African continent and in Tokyo in the Asian continent. It has approximately 400 staff members across the world consisting of advocates, activists, journalists, academics and country experts. Now, let us try and understand the focus areas of the work of Human Rights Watch. Issues raised by Human Rights Watch in its reports and in its campaigns include rights of vulnerable groups such as children, disabled, women, LGBT communities, migrants and refugees. In addition, it engages with civil and political rights issues such as terrorism and anti-terrorism, arms control, free speech, torture, social and cultural rights such as environmental rights as well as health, and human rights abuses related to economic activities of business, which could encompass a violation of both sets of rights, that is civil and political rights as well as social, economic and cultural rights. Human Rights Watch includes international human rights and humanitarian law standards while critiquing abuses by state and non-state actors, and it promotes international justice. Its work on human rights defenders is also noteworthy. Every year, it presents a Human Rights Defenders Award to activists who demonstrate leadership and courage in their work as human rights defenders. Such award winners thereafter participate in and strengthen the work of Human Rights Watch in investigating and in highlighting violations of human rights. Human Rights Watch is active on issues of armed conflict, armed control and implementation of international human rights and humanitarian law standards. As part of its work on this cluster of issues, HRW is one among 6 NGOs which established the Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers in 1998. Through its work in the international campaign to ban landmines, it helped introduce what is known as the Ottawa Treaty that prohibits the use of anti-personnel landmines. Human Rights Watch has its offices in almost all the regions of the world: Africa, Americas, Asia, Europe, Central Asia, Middle East, North Africa, as well as the United States. In 2014, its region-wise expenditure was highest in Africa. That was followed by Asia. Programmatically, in the same year, it spent maximum on women's rights, followed by children's rights. Let us now discuss the strategies, approaches, and significant achievements of Human Rights Watch. When it was named as Helsinki Watch, it adopted the strategy of naming and shaming abusive governments using media advocacy and contacts with policymakers as one of its major tools. Now, Human Rights Watch adopts a wide range of strategies and activities in addition to its original strategy of naming and shaming. Human Rights Watch investigates human rights abuses, highlights the facts widely, and pressurizes governments to secure justice for the victims. Such investigative work is usually undertaken in close partnership with human rights activists in the country of focus. As in the case of Amnesty International, which we discussed a little while earlier, publication of reports is the backbone of Human Rights Watch's work. It has published more than 100 reports and briefings on the status of human rights in at least 90 countries. Human Rights Watch produces and publishes an annual world report in which it provides an overview of the status of human rights in each of the countries. Apart from the annual world reports, it also publishes reports on topical issues such as on Europe's refugee crisis, on failure to protect the fundamental right to education, on issues such as children with disabilities, on the water crisis, on violation of labor rights by global supply chains, detention and prosecution of Tibetans in China, life under ISIS, and media freedom. Now, let us look at the similarities and differences between Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are very well known international NGOs operating from Western countries, undertaking very important work in documenting human rights violations and research on human rights standards. Often, the two INGOs collaborate with each other in addressing human rights issues, as a result of which joint reports are published. The first joint report of Amnesty International and HRW, titled "The Rest of Their Lives: Life Without Parole for Child Offenders in the United States," was published in 2005. The two international NGOs have also issued joint statements to international bodies. However, there are essential differences in their work, primarily in their structure and the methods of promoting and protecting human rights across the world. Amnesty International was established in 1961 with its headquarters in London, while Human Rights Watch was established in 1978 with its headquarters in New York. For Amnesty, its activism is driven by its members. Although it has a secretariat, its international board is elected by the membership-based International Council meeting. Both members and the secretariat together chalk out strategies for the organization. On the other hand, Human Rights Watch is not a membership-based movement. Supporters of the organization can fund its work, but they play no role in determining its focus areas of work or the strategies that it should adopt. Activism emerges from its research into human rights violations. These are the essential differences between Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Now, let us look at a third international organization, a very well-known organization with a special legal status, and this is called the International Committee of the Red Cross. In short, it is referred to as the ICRC. The ICRC, established in 1863, was by a person named Henry Durant. It is perhaps one of the oldest and most well-known humanitarian organizations in the world. The ICRC and the Red Crescent movement are part of a global humanitarian network consisting of more than 8 crores of people who help those who face humanitarian crisis, including disasters, conflict, health, as well as social problems. Although ICRC is popularly thought of to be an international NGO, in actuality it is not. ICRC is not a governmental, an intergovernmental or a non-governmental organization. ICRC has a hybrid status, making it neither an NGO nor an international or an intergovernmental organization. Like the INGOs, the ICRC is autonomous of governments and is an independent and neutral body and organization. Like the other INGOs that we have discussed, its existence is not mandated by governments. However, unlike Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, ICRC's functions and activities, which mainly are extended to protection and to providing assistance to victims of conflict, are mandated by the international community of states, and they are specifically mentioned in the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, which are among the most widely acknowledged and ratified international treaties in the world. I am sure you have heard of Geneva Conventions, and in the Geneva Conventions and its additional protocols, there is a very specific mention of ICRC, and thus there is an acknowledgement of a legal status to the ICRC. Due to this, ICRC has an international legal personality with privileges and immunities which are very similar to intergovernmental organizations. Since the ICRC's privileges and immunities are widely recognized by governments, ICRC is not treated as an NGO but as an organization that works with an international legal mandate. Let us try and understand the legal basis of ICRC's work. In context of international armed conflict, the 4 Geneva Conventions as well as the additional protocol 1 provide a mandate to ICRC and give an expansive right of initiative, including to visit prisoners of war. In context of non-international armed conflict, Common Article 3 to the 4 Geneva Conventions provides a mandate to the ICRC, as a result of which it enjoys a right of humanitarian initiatives. In context of natural and human-made disasters, internal disturbances and tension, which may not fall under either of the categories that I have discussed just now, the ICRC's work is mandated by the statutes of the International Red Cross and the Red Crescent movements. The ICRC may offer its services to governments which would not be considered as an interference with the country's affairs. Accepting or rejecting the ICRC's offer of services is the prerogative of the concerned government. It is also important to understand the strategies, approaches and significant achievements of the ICRC. ICRC's mission is to protect the lives and dignity of victims of armed conflict and other situations of violence, and to provide them with assistance. The ICRC also endeavors to prevent suffering by promoting and strengthening human rights law and universal humanitarian principles. ICRC's work has dual nature. One, that is operational, that is helping victims of conflict and in other contexts of violence and disaster. Second, standard setting, that is developing and promoting principles and standards of international humanitarian law. Both the areas of work are interlinked and are reinforced by each other. The operational activities take place within the framework of humanitarian law, while the standard setting initiative draws upon the experiences derived from operational activities. The ICRC has 7 fundamental principles which govern and guide its work. These are: first, humanity; second, impartiality; third, neutrality; fourth, independence; fifth, voluntary service; sixth, unity; and seventh, universality. ICRC's humanitarian work extends to all regions of the world: Africa, Asia and Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, Middle East and the Americas. In recent times, it has had key operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Lake Chad, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria and Yemen. In conclusion, this module has discussed the work of 3 very important international organizations that work to protect and promote human rights throughout the world: Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and the ICRC. It also highlights similarities and differences in the work of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and discusses how ICRC stands apart from both of them as well as from other international NGOs. Needless to say, this module is not all encompassing. Please read through the notes which have been provided for this module. Please look at the web links. Please also go through the additional reading, and by doing so, you will deepen your knowledge on this particular topic. With that, we come to the end of this module. Thank you.